I did not know you did the Hellboy thing. I was checking out the Hellboy thing, and I was like, well, it's not Hellboy. It's called Pancakes. So
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about why Hellboy, and then why did you, are you able to use his image?
Well, so it was sort of a fan film, so it wasn't anything that we did, like as part of an actual, like an actual, like a sanctioned development. Um, I'd always been a big fan of Hellboy. I've read the comics ever since one of my animators gave me like a bunch of the graphic novels to read. And that was like, I came in kind of late to it. It was like maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And they were all great. I mean, all the stories and the mythology and just the whole characterization all the time was really great. But like for me, the one definitive Hellboy story that always just like when I read it, I'm like, this is like the best thing ever. Was the Pancake story from the actual graphic novel, and it was only like 2 pages. It was like probably one of the shortest Hellboy stories ever, if not of our time. But in those 2 pages, it basically summed up for me personally. It kind of summed up everything that was great about the character and why one of the reasons why I kind of endeared to him, which was, it was a reflection of childhood innocence and it was a reflection of nature versus nurture. Like are you who you're meant to? Are you born to have a destiny and is that unchangeable, or do we make our own destiny? And especially since Hellboy was kind of adopted by the Bureau of Paranormal Investigation, uh, and uh, and then I was adopted also as a growing up. There was that sort of connection there. Like I kind of understood, the whole thing. It's like who I am and where I'm going. Does that have anything to do with who I was and who I was born into? How does that all connect? And I think people what it really comes down to, again, one of the reasons I liked that comic so much was, really the answer is in the simplicity of, it's just, being loved and being cared for as a child just the first time you do something as simple as taste a pancake when you're a kid, that fills
Yep.
you with so much joy and, wonder. And, and I thought it was just extremely hilarious and truthful that, that's one of the things that set him out, set Hellboy off on the path, as someone who became a champion of humanity, who wasn't even human. And so, yeah, I love that story, and I always thought, it's such a sweet, short little story that I always wanted to make that into, like, man, wouldn't it be great if this was made into, like, an animation? And so,
Yeah.
it was one of those things that a few years, about a year or two ago, or whatever, we just said, what? We had some time in the studio where, we were in between projects, and I kind of saw that opening, and so I went down and I pitched it to Graham, our executive producer, and I'm like, look, just, give me a few guys, just for like a week or two, no big deal, we'll work around everything else. And he was really cool about it. He's like, yeah, go for it. I love the story. And so we sat down, and then we just we brought it to life. And that's kind of the genesis. Like I said, I just wanted to share that story with people in an animated fashion.
Yeah.
Because I thought it was such a powerful story. So.
Yeah, and of course, I've got a 5-year-old right now, and it's like, no, don't want to change any food, don't want to try any food out, and then of course
Yeah.
they get hungry enough, or they look to
Right.
doing that. I want so you grabbed a few guys to do the animation,
Yeah.
but can you give me I mean, you came up with the idea and you storyboarded it, but can you tell me the rest of the process? Like,
Yeah. Sure.
what was the software you're using and all that stuff?
So, the idea obviously was Mike Mignola, the original creator and the illustrator of Hellboy. I just kind of wanted to bring his story to life. But yeah, so we what also started it was what we really wanted to do was kind of everybody tried to accomplish the comic book look, like making 2D animation look like a comic book. Into the Spider-Verse, that did an amazing job of it, and so there was a lot of inspiration drawn from that. But
that one kind of pushed it like way over the top, or like a lot of half tones and RGB separation, and there was just a lot of stuff going on to make it really, really super stylized. But that really didn't, that kind of a look really didn't fit in with Mike's artwork. I really wanted to make it as true to form as possible as the actual artwork in the comic, and so we took some inspiration from that, but then we tried to kind of develop our own little look of it. So it really kind of kept those super dark, it's a really dark, contrasty, thick black lines, that kind of stuff, and kind of keep it true to the style of the original comic as much as possible. So I was really happy with that. So we ended up using, as far as our production process on this, we used Maya for all of our 3D animation, for the rigging, modeling, texturing, ZBrush, fairly standard stuff, ZBrush for sculpting for the characters, and then Substance Designer and Painter for all of the texturing and some of the materials. And then, Nuke and After Effects for the compositing and the animation, or the compositing and motion graphics. And then Redshift. So rendering, we use Redshift for all of our rendering on it. And that's kind of pretty much the majority of the tools. Our audio guy, Gary, he uses the typical, Pro Studio, like Pro Tools and, all your standard audio, the standard Pro audio stuff.
So the sound on the Foley and everything was really good too.
Yeah.
Was it how did you get the sample of the child? Was that must have been pre-recorded, the guy and the child?
Gary kind of masterminded that whole thing. Gary Parks, he's our main audio guy, and he did it. I mean, he was a one-man band, dude. He scored the music. He did all the Foley, and he even was the voice of one of the demons and the general. So yeah, man, Gary's pretty much like a Swiss Army knife. That dude can do anything. He did great. I mean, it was exactly kind of what I heard in my head, and I think he set up the really good, kind of contrast of like, in the army base when you're talking to Hellboy, and then you see Hellboy in the desert, and then finally when we get down to hell, when we pan down and we go down, to the cities in hell, he did a great job with that. And Gary kind of did all that. Yeah.
Yeah, the dropping of the fork, the moving of the chair. I mean, just those little things you never really notice until you're like, okay, how did the sound design? You start checking the list off. Wow, the visuals are looking really good. And now that you've outlined all the different software, I mean, that's why it looks so good. I was like, I really wanted to know. And on your opinion, do you think what would be the poor man's way of animating this? Would this be like a Blender and
I don't know. These days, I really don't know if there's such a thing as like a poor man. I mean, like if you like in terms of cost, obviously Blender's free, so you can't really beat that. And it's got, Blender has got a ton of development money poured into it by like a lot of big AAA game studios and like animation studios who they see the power of Blender, and so they want and the fact that it's free, and I think there's a lot of benefit to having an open source animation package that has really heavily supported by the community. So I'm very excited to see where Blender kind of takes off and goes over the next 5-10 years. Even now it's got a lot of great features. The hardest thing I think for Blender for people in our industry is if you start off using it, it's fine. Like you're kind of used to the workflow and how it works, but it's a very, very different workflow than like all the other packages out there. So like for people who are used to using Maya, 3D Studio Max, whatever. When you jump into Blender, you're just like, wow, where is everything? So it's just kind of hard to get used to that workflow. And they have like, Blender's been pretty good about like making like layouts and keyboard shortcuts to kind of help that process. But it's still different enough, than a lot of the other packages. But it's extremely powerful, man. I'm very impressed with the new the real-time lighting, like real-time shading and lighting thing. I mean, it's pretty mind-blowing what you can do in the viewport in Blender. I'd love to see that get, and that was one of the things we even contemplated is, we're always trying to push a lot of the real-time rendering with like, Unity and Unreal and stuff like that. We contemplated doing that for Hellboy, actually, just, since it was our own pet project. But at the end of the day, like we just thought we could get there a little bit faster just using a more traditional process with Redshift. And Redshift is like super fast anyway. I mean, it's all GPU accelerated, and so it's certainly no slouch in the speed department. So yeah, definitely Blender in terms of just being free is a big one. I'm sure like I spend most of my days in Maya, Houdini. We don't really use 3D Studio Max a whole lot. Occasionally we'll use it for like very specific projects. But yeah, really, Maya, just really, I think Blender is a great starting point for people who are just trying to get into the industry and learn it. Despite the differences in the UI, I think that if you kind of learn it in Blender, you can learn it, wherever. But even still, like a lot of for people who are just getting into it, like a lot of like Maya, even they have like student licenses where you can get a license free if you're a student. But yeah, no, Blender is a great option for low cost. Like if you're just trying to bootstrap out an animation production, for sure.
Yeah, and I if you've ever seen the Inferno and the Nuke in those demos, you're just like, this is the stuff. This is what they're using in the industry standard,
Yeah, Nuke is crazy, man. I mean, Nuke is obviously pretty much the standard compositing package for a lot of high-end stuff. I come from an After Effects background, so I've been able to pretty much push After Effects to do like anything I've ever wanted it to do. But there's a lot of stuff in Nuke that just, especially when you get into like really high-end, like heavy-duty compositing, Nuke just makes it a lot easier. But yeah, you can't really go wrong. I mean, After Effects, Nuke, I mean, either one of those are more than capable of doing, a lot of great stuff. So yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna stray away from all the tech talk because man, we can go really deep. I know, ironically, my daughter is hell bent on doing the 2D animation and frame by frame, and I was like, gosh. I was like, you got to get an in-betweener. There's got to be an in-between. And I didn't know anything about in-betweeners. We found Canny, which does an algorithm that takes lines and morphs them, but you have to draw them in a certain way. And I'm like, what you should be learning is the Toon Boom, which seems to be an industry standard. And it's hard for me to navigate her because in my mind, she should start with Blender and see how far she should go before we, and I've got free versions of Max, but I didn't know. I was like, man, Max shouldn't be the way to go. So.
If you like to do 2D animation, there's a lot of really good 2D animation apps on like mobile devices. Like I don't know if you have an iPad or an Android or whatever, but there's a lot of really simple, like basically just kind of get down and animate type packages that are great for kids. That are actually even pretty powerful, even for just like regular 2D animators. So. I definitely recommend that if you've got an interest in 2D animation, as far as just kind of getting used to drawing, like in that style. I don't have it. I'd have to go get my phone and look at it. But there's a ton of good packages out there for getting kids kind of into it.
Yeah, very good.
As far as 2D animation goes, yeah.
Yeah, she's got that Wacom tablet, so she's been with Photoshop beginning out, and then using some video editor to compile the things. But anyway, let me get back to the Hellboy, and then we'll go to the found script. So I'm going to go back to the beginning when we were talking about Hellboy's concept. You learned about Hellboy, and you were a fan, and it just started coming in, and then the Pancakes. So if you can give me those two worlds, wanting to mix those two together.
Yeah, so like one of my senior animators introduced me to Hellboy like maybe 7 years ago. It was a while back. And like I said, he just kind of, I started consuming all the graphic novels, and I'm like, man, this is great, the mythology, the character, all that kind of stuff. And, for me, individually, like I always identified with Hellboy because, he was adopted by, this branch of the U.S. military for paranormal investigation, and so, it was always the nature versus nurture, I mean, like, here's a baby demon who is created to bring about the end of the world, essentially, and and then he grows up to be humanity champion, and it's like I always thought that was great, and there's a part of me that kind of resonates in that, in the sense that it does ask that age-old question, and that's something you kind of even in my case, just regular adopted guy, I mean. I never really spent a whole lot of time, asking, hey, what was my biological parents like, or anything like that. I was, my mom and dad were awesome, and they gave me a great home, and, they were, huge in me becoming, the guy that I am today. but you know, but there are a lot of people who question that more. You know, like where do I come from? You know, what was I originally? And I think that's a pretty profound thing. That, you know, even if you're born into, you know, even if you're with the parents that you're born with, a lot of time, you know, as you grow up, you start asking those questions. You know, like, you know, where did I come from? You know, who are my ancestors? You know, that kind of stuff. And so that's what I really liked about that. And Pancakes, that particular short film, that short comic for Hellboy was just it was like the shortest 2-page little Hellboy story. You know, it wasn't long at all. But in that 2 pages, I felt like that encapsulated like almost everything that was great about Hellboy. You know, and also being a kid, you know, like what you talked about with your daughter and, you know, and trying, and your kid trying out new food. It's like, you know, no, you know, I don't want to eat pancakes, you know, you're like, you try it. Every parent has gone through that, you know, and how they tie that whole notion, you know, that simple joy of discovering something so, you know, wonderful, you know, in terms of food, you know, tying that into how that kind of, you know, shaped him to be, you know, to continue on his path as the savior of, you know, humanity. I just thought that was always, you know, like hilarious and sweet and wonderful all at the same time. And so I'd always wanted to make an animated version out of that. You know, and like I said, we were kind of shuffling in between projects, and I kind of saw an opening about a year or two ago. And I went into our executive producer, Graham, and I was like, hey, you know, I think I can just borrow a few of the guys to work on this thing. I think it would be a really awesome short, and, you know, that we could show off, you know, some of our, you know, how far we can push the rendering, you know, and just, you know, show off some storytelling skills. And so he was very supportive. Graham kind of, you know, our executive producer, Graham Hagood, he kind of let us run with it, and, you know, and we busted it out. And I was really happy. It turned out, you know, exactly like I thought in my head. And I feel pretty good about, you know, kind of the look we created and, you know, telling the story. And, yeah, so I'm glad I got to bring that, you know, bring that short story to life. And, you know, we put it out there, and it was really also very satisfying after the fact. When a lot of the Hellboy community, the people who are big fans of the comic, you know, they were just like, oh man, you know, this is awesome. I want to see an animated series made out of this, you know. And then, so, you know, Netflix, if you hear this, you know, please give me a call, and I would be happy to expand on this universe. Yeah, so I'm really happy I got to kind of let this thing get out into the world in an animated fashion. So.
Yeah, and what was the time frame of getting everything done? I guess when you finally got the green light to use some of the components there at the Post Asylum, and then go ahead and tell me.
It was pretty fast. I mean, you know, we kind of had to jump off and on to work on, like, you know, actual paying client projects, but it was like a month or two. It was like maybe a couple of months. I mean, 2 or 3 months top. You know,
but you mean like not like everyday consistent? It was like off hours, like during
like
lunch or
off hours, and then just like, you know, hey, this guy's going to be free for a few days, so he can work on the models and do whatever. So yeah, it was just kind of, you know, just it's a juggle, you know, just like anything, it's a juggling act, you know, just kind of juggling everything between projects. So yeah, it was just you know, roughly 2 to 3 months or so. I think we kind of busted it out, and we also kind of at the time. The other opportunity was that the new Hellboy movie was coming out at the time too, and I thought it would be great to kind of put it out, like kind of, you know, just to kind of, as the movie came out, it just to kind of like a little supplemental material, you know, just to have that love letter to Hellboy out there. So yeah, we put that out there, you know, right around that same time. So yeah.
And that would be interesting if Netflix picked it up, because you're like, now you have to get series, now you have to get writers, and then start just going at it with a full team.
And there's obviously a whole hodl of legal and, you know, whatever stuff that goes along with that. But yeah, no, it would be awesome, man. I mean, there's so much. I think there's a lot of, you know, everybody knows all the stories of Hellboy as an adult, but I think there's a ton of opportunity to tell, you know, stories about kid Hellboy, essentially, you know, and all the stuff that he got into. I think that would be a lot of fun, you know, just because it's such an interesting time in his life as a character, you know, because he's kind of becoming, you know, forming himself and who he is and all that kind of stuff. So it would be a ton of fun. And I think there's a lot of there's a lot of good storytelling to be mined out of that whole period in his life, I think. So,
yeah, definitely. Hellboy: The Lost Years.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
let's move on to the script now. You had a script founder. Is it called Found?
Found. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Tell me about
So
that.
yeah, that's like a whole separate thing. That actually started. What we entered there was a buddy of mine was telling me, was telling me his story about his grandfather, who was a pilot in World War II and got shot down in the final days of the war over Japan. And they didn't, he got shot down. He was missing in action. And then, years later, they found the U.S. military gave them a report where they found his body, and they sent, his personal effects and whatever they found back to the state, to his dad, who, who the character, his grandfather. They basically sent his personal effects back to the family, along with the military report saying, here's where we found your dad, blah blah, your grandfather, blah blah blah. And so he was telling me the story, and he's like, man, I'd really love people to hear the story. I'd really like to turn this into a script. And I'm like, and as he was telling me the story, I was like, well, this is really awesome. But what really stuck in my head as I was hearing the story was, I don't think the story is about your grandfather. The story is about the men who found your grandfather. Like that's a whole like, such a unique part of World War II and really just the armed services in general that nobody really ever talked about, which is after the war is over, and you've got people who are dead and missing in action and battlefield, with dead bodies and whatever. It's like someone has to go in, get all those bodies, clean up, identify them, and try to figure out what to do with them, who they are, and you can imagine, because it's war, sometimes that job is easier said than done, and so I just thought, man, this is fascinating. It's like I've never, it just never dawned on me. It's so obvious that there is a branch of the military dedicated to that, but you never hear about that because everybody else talks about the people fighting the battles and the war and all that kind of stuff. And so I just started coming up with this idea about this group of guys who, based off the actual military report, who found his grandfathers and what were their backstories, so that's the part that was kind of, that kind of gelled really the script is just, hey, what does it do to a person to have to, deal with, finding, day after day, just going and trying to find dead bodies and catalog them. And then, which obviously is a job that really nobody wants in the Army, that's probably the least, everybody tries to get out of that job. And so we created a fictional character that kind of leads this group of men, and who got his own trauma from serving in the European front in World War II. And so that was kind of the gist of it. Is these guys kind of coming, it's after the end of the war. These guys are in Japan, which they're strangers in a strange land. This is a culture that's completely foreign to them. We don't know, and we're not as enamored with Japanese culture as we are today, as we were back then. It was more of a mysterious kind of thing. And then just, the people in Japan who they've just lost the war and their whole way of life have been completely just turned upside down. They're now told that their emperor is no longer a god, because he was worshipped as a deity before the war ended. They've seen, the cities get burned to the ground, so they're struggling with, malnutrition, starvation, and all that kind of stuff. So here's a society who's been pushed to the very, very edge of, of being able to, deal with, just day-to-day life. And then here, we're occupying the island and, what's all involved in that. So I thought it was a really good, and again, that's something I really never really saw reflected a whole lot in, modern TV and war movies. And everybody always talked about the battles and, the dog fighting and all that kind of stuff, but nobody ever really talked about what happened immediately after, and that's what I liked about it was, I also think that people have forgotten a lot of the lessons from World War II and, you know, everything that kind of happened. And so it was great to be able to write a script that kind of dealt with all those things and, you know, reintroduce them and, you know, and you know, just talk about, you know, what happened to people in war and after the war and how do we, you know, how as a human being do you process all that and deal with it, you know? And so that it was that script, you know, kind of revolved around that, about the men who were responsible for trying to find those dead bodies, and specifically, and in this case, find my friend's grandfather, and, you know, and the effects of that, you know, on them after, you know, as they struggle through that whole process. So,
yeah, and is it something where is it a short film or a feature length?
it's a feature, yeah. It's a full blown feature, yeah.
What would be what do you think the budget something like that would be?
You know, that's funny you mentioned that, because, you know, as a VFX guy, you know, I immediately read the script, and there's always a part of me in the back of my head when I'm writing, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to write that. I'm not going to write that because that's way too expensive, you know. So I can't, it's hard for me to turn that off completely, you know. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm trying to tell the best story. But well, I'm always writing.
You've seen that? Was it Love, Death, and Robots? I was like, I think it's full game, man. Let's do it.
Oh,
you know?
Yeah. You know, and we've discussed kind of doing it more animated like that. But in my head, I always thought it was the live action. You know.
Yes.
Although the thing is obviously with COVID and, you know, the pandemic and all that kind of stuff, that's kind of blown that out of the water, at least in the short term, for a little bit. But we actually, and one of the things we've been actually exploring on our end is. We've been doing a lot of testing and set up to shoot this a little bit more like Mandalorian style, where we shoot it on like a, you know, on a dome, and we do like real time projections with real like 3D geometry for the buildings and sets and everything. So that's kind of what we're doing some testing on right now. Just as
yeah, how close are you guys doing that? There was a guy on Steam that was selling it, or selling a version of it, but the ratings weren't that good.
Like for or whatever. I think you just froze. Are you
yeah, I just froze. Yeah. What did you say?
Yeah. So you're talking about like the software that makes all that happen or whatever. Like you mentioned, you said the ratings weren't all that good.
Yeah, there's a guy that put basically a Unity style video game on Steam that's all about handheld. You know, turn your Vive controller into a you know, put it on a camera or put it on a basically an LCD screen, and then
that stuff is pretty. I mean, that stuff is pretty well documented. There's not really a whole lot of what really gets tricky is it's all about like the how you're interfacing with whatever screen. Like let's say you've got like an LCD monitor in the background, and that's like a window. And so whenever you move the camera, you know, you want the perspective on the monitor change to make it look like a real window, you know. That's where it gets a little tricky, talking to the hardware, the camera, and all that metadata and all that kind of stuff. So, and that's kind of what we're doing. I mean, to put a Vive controller on a camera and track it in 2D space, that's not a big deal. But it's just getting everything synced up, and, you know, latency and, you know, brightness and all that kind of stuff. That's where it gets a little tricky. So we're just kind of starting on that process. You know, we haven't gotten very far, but that was kind of one of the things, just knowing that, okay, well, you know, if doing a huge production in Japan, you know, and even if we will be able to go to Japan and shoot this thing, it's like, well, first of all, a lot of the film takes place in Osaka, again, immediately after the war, and Osaka is being burnt to the ground. So, you know, you could shoot it on green screen and do like, you know, do it the traditional route. But even that, you know, I mean, you know, it takes time and money and, you know, whatever. So, so it's a lot more interesting. I think that in general, because you're going to see a lot more like real-time in-camera effects, you know, where they do that. I think that you know, this script it gave us a good opportunity to kind of an extension of what we do anyway at the company at Element X. It gave us an option to kind of explore that, and, you know, take our interactive department and our VFX department and just have them work on it and see what they can come up with, you know. So yeah, we're kind of pursuing that as an option to shoot it that way for some of the bigger, like for some of the shots that are just harder, like, you know, showing a bombed out, you know, wrecked city in the background, and being able to do that in camera as opposed to having to do it the traditional, you know, compositing way.
Now, how do you
So,
feel?
yeah.
I know, and I've seen you read. I've read some of your articles in the past about Disney films, and then anime, and how the realism, and then the stylizing of just the Disney. Do you feel that when animation is going to get to a point where, like, say for instance, motion capture with a hint of the stylizing from an animator, do you think that the majority of it's kind of back? In my mind, it reminds me of film to digital, but it also reminds me of how Disney would, like for Cinderella, they would fake a lot of it in the sense that they would overlay a drawing of an actual person. Do you feel that?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go. I was going to say, there's a lot of that people don't realize with rotoscope, with Disney traced over.
Yeah.
And the thing is at the end of the day, it's all fake, right? I mean,
right.
Like even movies, like you're building cardboard sets, so however you get there, as long as it does the job and tells the story, I mean, who cares, I think, it's only going to get more and more prevalent, with digital actors and, we've already done a lot of that, even recreating like actors that are dead, and putting them in spots, so I think that's only going to continue, once that cat's out of the bag. It's just, it is what it is. I mean, Disney's obviously, they're remaking a lot of their 2D movies into full-blown 3D, like The Lion King and Aladdin, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, so that process is only going to continue. And it's only going to keep getting better and better, I mean, even if you look at like the deep fake stuff that's out there, on the internet, I mean, that stuff, so just basically taking a program, feeding it 300 photos, and then suddenly you can stick that on anybody's face and have it look like a real face.
Have you ever tried it?
I have not tried the specifics. I mean, all the stuff that we've done with face replacement, being a traditional like compositing process, I've never tried the deep fake one.
I tried to grab a couple of open source programs. It took forever, like even just 10 seconds. I'm sure there's plenty of things now that, I mean, that was last year sometimes when it was a really hot thing to do, but I wonder if that's going to be a standard plugin in some respects.
Oh yeah. It, even now, like maybe 3 or 4 years ago, part of the one of the hot things was like look transfer, or like you could take a piece of video footage and then go find like a Van Gogh painting or whatever, and then tell it to basically, take the look of the Van Gogh painting and apply it to the video, and then it made it look like it was an animated Van Gogh painting or whatever. So, that was the whole big thing. And now that's a plugin, it doesn't require, a whole, learning network. So same thing with this. It's just only going to be a matter of time before people just start making it easier and, it gets faster and, people use it. But it's just getting that specific piece of technology, that's scary, because there's a whole slew of legal and, ethical, uses that are not, very ethical, legal.
Yeah. And it reminds me of that movie, The Congress. I don't know if you ever saw that, The Congress.
I don't think I saw that one. Huh? No.
It has a lot of animation in it, but it was essentially about scanning in actors, and then the actress, the actress that was playing the role actually played. It was herself. She used her actual name as her. So she was playing as herself, and the studio got her for the rest of her life. She goes, "Wait a minute. I don't want you to scan me in and use me for the rest of my life. Young, old, I don't care. You can do whatever you want with me, but I want my image back in 20 years." They're like, "Man, by then technology and your fad might just totally." No, the movie actually stops and then begins at 20 years after that. She finally gets her image back, and you found out that the world is basically under a movie drug. The drugs are actually movies, so you're always on the movie.
Like doing it, at this point, I'm not surprised by anything. I think that'll be, and even to a certain degree, it's already, we're already kind of experiencing, like, in the 24-hour news cycle and, the instantaneous access to information and, fake news and all that kind of stuff. I mean, we're already kind of experiencing how hard that is to kind of, to moderate and, quarantine. And so it's only going to get worse, I mean, I don't really, the thing is most of these things, like I look at them and like, okay, well, that could be dangerous, but we could do this, but with the deep fake stuff, honestly, man, like I look at that footage and I'm like, even to my trained eye, I'm like, dude, I can't tell. Like, I mean, it's really hard to tell in a lot of these cases.
And especially with variable bit rates and stuff. I mean, forget about it.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of talk about like artificial intelligence will help us determine what's, fake and what's not fake. But I'm like,
oh,
Yeah.
Even worse, the artificial intelligence completing an image that it partially has. That's been blowing my mind.
Yeah, no, and even that to plug in now. You can buy you can get plugins for like After Effects and Nuke that like if you enter out a sequence and let's say 5 frames out of that sequence is bad, you don't have time to go back and re-render it. It'll basically recreate those missing images from the other images. I mean, like even that's a plugin basically now.
That's crazy.
Yeah, no, it's technology is wonderful and also very frightening and scary at the same time.
So what are you currently working on? Are you going to be doing another short, or are you going to work on?
We are working on another short right now. It's one of our own kind of homebrew things, completely original. And it's just a fun little thing that we did. The funny thing is, we thought we would have time during the whole pandemic thing. Like, okay, maybe things just slow down. But actually, it's been so freaking busy. We haven't had a chance to work on anything. So that's a good problem to have for sure. But we were inspired by a lot of some of the reaction to the pandemic and the quarantine and all that kind of stuff. So we're actually working on a short about that right now. And so we're about to go into layout for animation. We've got all the assets built. So hopefully that'll be done here shortly, and we can share that here with the world. But yeah, we've always got like 1 or 2 ideas kind of kicking in the back of our head just to kind of do something for fun, just to try to work on different styles that may not necessarily be like commercial, your normal run-of-the-mill commercial stuff. So yeah, that's what we're working on right now. So.
Very cool, man. Well, it's been great talking with you. And
yeah, man.
Hey, I was looking up profiles and stuff, and I was like, so you're president, founder of Element X, but you're in Post Asylum, and I tried linking in with you on the LinkedIn, but that's
no. So you're over there. I mean, we did the merger. We did our merger between Post Asylum and Element X, like I guess 2016. I think that happened.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, so it's been a while. We've been kind of going on off, and we've been all the gears and pistons have been firing, between all 3 companies, Pure Evil and Post Asylum and Element X for a while now. So it's been great. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, very good. And Big Bear Film Festival, you should go check out. And how did you hear about Big Bear? Did Gabriel reach out to you?
Yeah. I was surprised. I was surprised to you guys. I was like, what? You guys know each other? I had no idea. So yeah, no, I've known Gabe. Gabe and I have always talked about working on film for, oh gosh, I met him back in like 2005. I mean, it's been a long time. So yeah, obviously he's out in LA now, so I don't get to talk to him as much as I used to. Yeah, no, man, me and Gabe go way back. So yeah.
Very good, very good. Yeah, so Big Bear Film Festival, it's going to be running for a while. Go check out Hellboy Pancakes. And I guess did you submit your found script on?
Yeah, both of them are in the festival. So yeah.
Excellent, awesome. Yeah, I like to dive into that. All right, well, great. Well, man, we'll talk with you soon, and thanks for spending some time with us.
Man, absolutely. Good to talk to you, and talk soon.